Thank you for joining us for tonight's event. Our photography is such an important piece of our storytelling, and it doesn't happen without your support. It's your subscription that makes it possible. Many newspapers across the country have stripped away their staff photographers and armed their reporters with iPhones to take pictures. And while an iPhone can shoot a good photo, it can't make a great picture without a trained, experienced photographer behind it. We are so fortunate to have our dedicated photo staff and excited for you to meet them tonight. I also want to recognize our press operators who are also skilled at their craft and have the unenviable task of taking our photos and then reproducing them on newsprint. So now let me introduce you to our moderator tonight, our very talented photo editor, Michele McDonald, and then she will introduce you to Greg Rec and Derek Davis. Michelle's been the photo editor at the Press Herald for the last 4 years. The only downside of Michele as our photo editor is that she doesn't get to shoot photos as much as she did when she was a staff photographer at the Boston Globe, the Virginian Pilot, or the Concord Monitor. Now, she's traveled the globe on photo assignments from the Philippines to the Ukraine, but she's also had some other interesting experiences in her life, like when she was the first woman Texaco hired in New England to pump gas in White River Junction, Vermont. I actually think we could probably just do a whole show on Michele's experiences as a staff photographer. But we're thankful that she's with us here at the Press Herald, directing our photojournalism and managing our talented staff. Again, thank you to our subscribers for your support and joining us tonight. And now I'd like to welcome Michele McDonald, Portland Press Herald photo editor, along with chief photographer Greg Rec and staff photographer Derek Davis. Enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Lisa. So I'm Michele, and I'm here with Greg and Derek. And I want to tell you a little bit about them. Greg came to the Portland Press Herald as an intern when he was a junior in college. And it was 1995, and they must have really liked him because he was hired 2 years later in 1997. Besides being the kind of photographer that will take the most ordinary event and make it interesting. He's a kind of a technical genius. He's a great videographer. He's he's built the most incredible chicken coop for his very lucky chickens, in addition to his house. He does this kind of stacking wood thing that's called, let me see, Holzhausen, because he gets bored stacking, wood in a normal way. So this is Greg at work. You can see that his eye for design even goes into stacking firewood. He's the king of puns at the Press Herald, and we charge 50 cents a pun, and he's bought many rounds of donuts for the editors. He's also a really, really good photographer. And now I'm going to move on to Derek, Derek is a great photographer, and he also raises chickens, but he stacks wood in a normal way, he says. He really, really loves covering high school sports. He's a great surfer, and he also loves shooting surfing photos. And here are a couple of his surfing photos. He went to UNE and designed his own college degree course. It was like in environmental studies or something, and he designed it so that he could use photography to, teach about the environment. And I know that he was a really great student who was really self-motivated, talented, hardworking, curious, always wanting to learn more, because one of his teachers has a community plot in the garden next to me and was telling me about him. And he still is all of those things and more. He's got an incredible sense of composition. and timing. And thank you, Derek, for being here. Now, there's also, we have other photographers who couldn't be here tonight, and I just want to mention them. This is Sean Willett, and these are a few of his photos. And Brianna Picture, who, this is one of hers, and Ben McKenna. It's been a real honor to be able to show our lives and your lives. And I really want to thank everybody for subscribing and making that possible. I also really feel like I want to thank our photographers who put themselves at risk to go out there every day in this really, you know, crazy kind of challenging, difficult time. I think that photography is really uniquely powerful in recording what we're living through, which is really history in the making. And so the way we're going to do this, we're going to talk about making the photos and what we see in them and why we like what we're showing. And for, you know, a half an hour or so, and then we'll take questions. We're going to do it in groups, and we're going to start now with the first group. And I'm going to run through these pictures, and then we'll talk about them, and then we'll move on to the second group. So I'm just going to run through. This is the empty shelves of a store. And this is a Black Lives Matter protest in front of the Portland Police Station. And I started with these two because in a way I feel like they represent the extremes of what we've gone through during this pandemic season, you know. And I think, you know, this one kind of emotionally speaks to me of isolation, even though we're not showing somebody isolated in their house. And I'm moving on to these photos, which are a group of photos of high school seniors, most of them, I think there's one high school junior here, in their prom outfits, taken at the very beginning of the summer, right around Memorial Day. These are all kids who have who are gonna miss their prom. And for many of them, it was their only prom. These were taken by Brianna. And here we have a Ben McKenna photograph. This is a French immersion school that opened in June, and one of the students coming and having his temperature taken before the start of school. And moving on, this is at Big Al's, and these are, you know, it's before the 4th of July, and people are watching a video of the fireworks they can buy. And this is the last group in this section, the last photo in this section. And this is somebody turning in an absentee ballot outside of York Town Hall. And in a time when there were, you know, this was voting for the primaries, and this was taken by Greg. And so we can move back and look at these, but why don't I start with you, Greg, and, you know, talk about how you decided to shoot the absentee ballot photo in the way that you did, and move on and comment on anything you like in this group.
Sure. So the absentee ballot, I don't know if you want to call that photo up. The thing that was important to me there was to be able to show that they were doing this outside under a tent, because they weren't allowing people inside town hall to drop off their absentee ballots. And it was a bright sunny day, despite the clouds you see in the upper right-hand corner. It was mostly sunny, and to try to get the exposure of showing that we were outside, it was so dark under the tent, I had to set up a couple of lights that I fire remotely with an attachment on my camera. And I wouldn't normally do that on a news assignment, but because of the just range from the bright sunlight to the shade under the tent, I had to set up those lights so you could see what was actually going on under the tent. And I thought I was going to have to wait, an hour for someone or a couple of people to show up. But I was there for about an hour and a half, and it was a steady stream of people. There must have been, in my hour and a half there were probably 50 or more people who came in to hand in ballots, which is a testament to how many absentee ballots are being handed in this year because of the fears of voting in person at the polls.
Do Derek and Greg, tell me what you think of the prom portraits by Brianna.
Well, I thought it was a great idea that Brianna had, because most, if not all, of these students were not going to get to attend prom, and many of them already had their outfits picked out. So this was really a great way for Brianna to show these students in what they would have worn if they could have gone to prom. And I felt like, what a great thing to be able to showcase these students in how they wanted to look when they went to their high school prom, but yet could not. So it gave them some exposure and just sort of validated the fact that how important prom is to high school students. And, I know the high school students appreciated these photos.
Yeah, I agree. I know a lot of students that were seniors last year, and they lost out on a lot. They was coming up on the most exciting part of their senior year. All the fun stuff happens in the spring and the summer. So you really had to feel for them. And, maybe this made them a little happier to see this and see that other people were feeling that loss like they were. The lighting on the photos is extraordinary. They're just really beautiful. When I first saw them, they really struck me. Just a great job by Brianna.
I think that look at this photo, look at the emotion there. I mean, there's a lot of dignity, and you think that a prom is just a prom, but it's also a rite of passage, and it's a really important one where you're, finishing your life at home, really, and moving out into the world. And I think she's captured such beauty and elegance and dignity. You see kind of the resignation and acceptance. You see so much in there. They're very quiet portraits, but they have so much emotion for me that you really feel what it's like, to be one of, you get a sense of how difficult it is to have your high school years end this way. And before we move on to the next group, I'll just say that, what's not to love about this picture, which tells the story and is sweet and engaging and a little sad all at the same time.
Right. If we were going to move on, I was going to ask you to show this photo because it's one of my favorites of Ben's from that time. And it's important to note here that this photo was taken in June, and this was a school in Freeport where students were beginning to go back to school. So they were sort of at the cutting edge of bringing students back in, and all of the protocols that would come to follow this fall for the school districts that are doing hybrid learning. And just the amount of worry in his expression in the unknown, I just think this captured that time of early June so well.
Couldn't agree more. Okay, so I think we need to move on. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And we're going to pass the torch on to Derek. The next set of photos are all from the protest this summer in Portland. And
Yeah, like Michelle said, at the end of May and the beginning of June, the Black Lives Matter protests started in Portland, and literally thousands of people were in the streets protesting and marching through the streets. And it was a huge contrast to what we had seen previously in Portland, because during the pandemic, once you left the city, you would see people exercising and walking dogs and gardening and just getting outside. And on the peninsula, it was just very, very quiet.
It was like a ghost town.
It was like a ghost town. It was very empty and it was very quiet. And then the protests started, and it was loud and it was electric. That's the best way I can describe it. And so, wow, what a change it was. And probably because of the shift I was working, I ended up covering a lot of the protests. And it was probably the biggest story that I've covered during my career. It definitely felt very important at the time and does now. So we'll start going through and looking at those photos.
Right, and we seem to have lost Michelle.
Oh.
So I have them queued up. Oh, is she coming back? There she is. And she's muted, but she'll come back to us.
I lost you, but here I am.
Yep. Good timing. We were just about to start talking about the photos.
Okay, can you see? I'll start again, and Derek, I'll let you.
Yeah, so all right, that's the first one, and this is one of the first protests I think that we covered. This is Greg's photo.
Right, this happened on a Sunday.
Yeah, this.
I forget the exact date, but they had started at the Portland Police Department, and they marched down Congress Street all the way to the Cumberland County Jail, and that's where this photo was taken. And they were very, very crowded and very in the faces of many of the police officers and corrections officers. And that's I tried to get behind the police line to get this perspective of what it looked like and what it felt like to be behind the line of officers with the protesters shouting at them.
So as Michelle goes through these photos, you may be able to see how the attitude of the protests, they really started to change. When they first started, it was very angry. It was very, very directed towards the police. And in Portland, and I can't speak for other cities, in Portland, Maine, that message really started to change quite a bit over the days, where it started to be more about change and less just frustration towards police. But this is from one of the first nights. This was on a Monday. I think it might have been June 1st. And this was the largest crowd that we saw in the city. And we saw police clashing with the protesters this night.
And these are from June 2nd, the following night. The protest started at the police department again and then went up to the Eastern Prom. And this is the group of people coming down Congress Street from the prom back toward Lincoln Park. And this is back by the police station. And these have moved on. We are now on June 3rd, and then this was
Sanford.
the 6th, and this was in Sanford. These are Sean Willett's photos. So the protests were all over, and we tried to cover as many of them as we could. And each protest had its unique personality, I feel. Like the one in Sanford, like this image shows, were attended by men with guns whose reason for being there wasn't exactly clear. They were ostensibly there, they said, to protect property. Although there wasn't any reports in previous protests of property damage outside of Portland. There was a little bit in the first couple of protests in Portland itself. I will say, you know, and Derek can address this too. I covered the protests on Sunday night and then Tuesday night. Derek did the one in between on Monday night and numerous ones afterward. But these protests were attended by thousands of people, many of whom were, you know, speaking quite loudly or yelling, and you know, some had masks, some did not. And I felt that for all the work that we had done covering the pandemic up until these protests, I did not feel at high risk or necessarily that exposed until covering these protests, because we were just in the middle of, you know, over 1,000 people. And you can tell by looking at these photographs, you can't cover an event like this by staying far away with the telephoto lens. You really need to be in the middle of things to get at the heart of the emotion of the protests, to sort of convey the feeling of being there. So we really had no choice but to be in the middle of these people, and with, you know, getting photos with wide angle lenses that bring you in close.
Yeah, I agree. And I think another reason why it felt so important to be covering these protests is because a lot of people they didn't feel safe to go out and attend the protests. There still weren't many people in the city. Most, you know, it was still empty except for the protests. So, you know, without us there bearing witness and telling these stories with our images and with the words, you know, people wouldn't get a sense of what was happening.
The last image was from Juneteenth. And it's kind of a really lovely one and a more hopeful one. And certainly, I mean, our Portland has been very lucky in that, you know, we haven't seen the kind of violence and problems that they have in Portland, Oregon. And I think that, you know, this is, it's an ongoing issue and we'll continue to cover it, but it was a really you know, it was really putting, everybody who went out there was putting themselves at risk. You know, the photographers, the protesters, the police, and it really speaks to what is great about our country, that we could all do that. And I think let's move on to the next group. And I'm not going to stop screen sharing in case I get lost again. And so Greg is going to introduce this next section. And we wanted to lighten up and start with some, you know, we also shot wonderful summer photos this summer. And this is one of them by Derek.
Right, and that's, you know, as photojournalists, we not only cover the important news and the big events and the protests and the pandemic itself and how people are adapting to it, how they're dealing with it, but we also spent our summer searching for those slice of life photos that we try to find in every year. And just to remind people that, you know, life is moving on. People are still living, they're getting out and doing things. And these photos show that, and they really showcase the style of the various photographers at the Press Herald. And there's some moments of fun and compositional beauty and quietness. Like this photo, is this Ben's photo?
Brianna.
Brianna, yeah. These two dogs at East End Beach in the fog. It's just such a lovely moment. And it's just one of those, this is, as photographers, we try to look for these moments in time that we hope that our readers will appreciate. And these dogs standing in the water who, you know, they're clearly, even though they look a little forlorn and wet, they're happy to be there. And some of the other photos as you move forward, Michelle, sort of show just, you know, this is a photo by Sean Willett of the work happening at the Lincoln Mill, which is a big project down in Biddeford. And this is a photo of mine from Long Sands Beach in York. I was down in York for a different story, but I saw weather moving in, and I said to myself, "Oh, hey, if I go down the Long Sands, we might see this passing through." I'd never seen clouds like this before, and I was able to hang out at the edge of the beach there and watch this move through. And about 3 minutes after this photo, the lightning and the rain kicked in, and I retreated to my car. This is a photo from Brianna about workers in Westbrook where an outbreak occurred. And this is a company called American Roots where immigrants will do, they create outfits for various companies. But there was an outbreak there, and so we went in to sort of show what they were working. You can go to Derek's photo of the basketball. That slice of life, I love this photo the second I saw it, because it's not every day that you see, you know, people in like white shirts and ties shooting hoops in Portland. So that's really what set this apart. And as he usually does, Derek captured the moment at just the right time with the ball in the air.
And as he usually does, he climbed to the top of the basketball
yeah.
or something.
Always,
how did you get that, Derek?
Derek goes to the extreme to get the right angle for the photo.
It's a trick that can't be used too much because it will get worn out. But I felt like this was the moment to do it, and I'm glad that I did. These guys were great. Their lives were completely changed by the pandemic. As they weren't able to go door to door anymore to spread their message. They were stuck inside behind a computer most of the day, and they just wanted to get outside and, as they called it, do work on the court. So it was fun.
And the next photo of Ben McCanna's of this squid or octopus kite flying over Bud Light in South Portland. The thing that I loved about this photo when I first looked at it was it transported me back to being a kid, lying in the grass and watching kites in the air. And as a kid, I never saw a kite quite this elaborate or crazy, but I really felt like I could connect with the kids who were on the lawn just marveling at this kite. And I think that's the hallmark of a really good photo, is when it stirs something in you, that it connects with you in a way that it transports you through time. And that's what this photo of Ben's did for me.
And Greg, earlier when we were talking about this photo, you remembered, I think it was Zach's subhead on it when it ran in the paper. Do you remember what that is?
Right, yes. So as Michelle explained earlier, I often I have a penchant for puns when I'm in meetings at the paper, and I get charged for them. And so there's often puns in, as subscribers, I'm sure most of you will know this, but there are often puns in the paper, whether they're in headlines. Most often they're over the top of the photos, and those are called kickers. And there is a page designer named Zach Aldrich who's quite good at it. And his kicker for this photo was, "Here's looking at you, squid," which I really appreciated. I sent him an email of appreciation for that one.
I think that, you know, there are also, Derek, this reminded you of somebody, of a famous painter.
Oh, I don't see it up on my screen yet.
Oh, you don't see it up on your screen?
I see it now. Yes, this is Ben's photo, a feature photo of a gentleman tying a knot down at the beach. And when I saw it, I thought, that looks like a Rockwell painting right there. We had a few hanging in our house, so I was a fan, and I just thought, it's a beautiful photo.
Yeah.
My thought was, is he going to try to resell that to L.O. Bean? Because it looks like something out of their catalog.
And this one is a quiet, it's a quiet photo. It's by Derek, and it was for one of our Monday digital photo page galleries on gardens, I think. But, you know, there's something so peaceful about it. I mean, I feel like I could hang this picture on my wall and look at it all winter long. It would make me feel a little bit better.
And I'd like to add from the garden series, because I noticed a comment from Jessica Simpson in Cape Liz where Derek photographed that wonderful reflection in the bird bath.
Oh, yes.
And I have to tell Jessica that photo it made it through the late hour edit of these final photos you're watching. It was one of the hardest things was for the three of us to work down these photos into what you're seeing now. But we all love that photo too, Jessica.
And Derek, tell us about, who's this?
This is one of Sean's photos, the golf.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is one of Sean's photos, I believe. He was covering.
That's Mark Plummer, who is a longtime golfer in Maine circles. And I think the things, and I'll let you go, Derek, but I think the thing for us was like, we were excited that we had some sports to shoot again.
Oh yeah, and this photo, it disappeared, but I love that photo that Sean got. It's really hard to get photos like that covering golf. I love covering sports. Golf may not be my favorite sport to cover. Get a little stale, but this is an amazing photo. I never would think you would get something like this from covering a golf tournament. I mean, it's so hard when they hit the ball off the course, you know, they're usually angry. They don't want photographers near them. And Sean was good for him to stick in there and get that shot.
I almost felt like it fit the pandemic. Like he was so far in the rough. It's kind of how we all feel. Like we're not on the fairway anymore in any of this.
Yeah, that's really, you know, we're almost out of time to show pictures, so I'm going to move on and just really briefly go through the next set. These are from, there was a homeless encampment out in front of City Hall for almost 3 weeks this summer. And this is one of Ben's photos. And Ben did a series of beautiful portraits. And we ran an incredible series of stories where we talked to some of the people at the encampment about what their experience was. And these were Ben's portraits to go with the series.
What I loved about the portraits that Ben did is it really brought you into who these people are, because it's so easy to not necessarily know their story or recognize them. And Ben's portraits and the vignettes that were written about them, they introduced you to these people and you got to know about their background, and I thought that was really enlightening.
Right. Okay, and then I'm going to move on. This was Brianna Picture, and I put it after the encampment at the homeless because this is a woman who had trouble getting the federal money that was made available to people who lost their job, and she ended up losing her car and her home, and it was just really, really difficult. Now, that happened after we took the photo. This was another Brianna's photo of a woman who came to Maine with a partner, and the pandemic hit shortly afterwards, and she was isolated, knew no one, and was a victim of domestic violence. I love this photo. This is one of Derek's, and it's one of those special ones that just, you know, everybody has opinions about photos, but sometimes something just really speaks to you. And for some reason, this one, it says something about summer and childhood and being small in a big world and just moving on. That really touched me.
Yeah, one thing about that photo is that I was wondering what he was doing, because that's a school, that's East End Community School. And I didn't know why he was walking his bike up there, but it was just so he could ride down the hill again. And I found that very cute.
Yeah. And this is a guy who was very personable and enforcing masks, you know, and rules for COVID on the beach. And because we're almost out of time, I mean, Strawberry, should I stop now or should we finish this group?
If you want to finish that group, we can do that before we move to audience questions.
Okay. This is a really funny one of Derek's that I love. Derek, what was this? What was the occasion for you?
Well, this is a coffee shop, and you know, it was shortly after they had reopened, and they were just trying different techniques to try to get customers back in. And one of them was to put out these giant blow up, you know, unicorn. There was one that was like a crazy looking monster that was inside, and it kept blowing over in the wind, and he would have to go out and straighten it. And I just felt like it really told the story of what these, you know, businesses are going through trying to survive during this time.
Great sports shot by Sean. High school graduation. This was you, Derek.
Yeah, this was me. This was Portland High graduation. And it was the only graduation I covered. Usually I cover about 5 or 6 of them, but it was you know, definitely a lot different. A lot of people sitting on their cars and waving to each other, and it was kind of fun to cover.
And this
Yeah,
one is
right.
so funny. It's so great to have a sense of humor in a photo, especially during this time when nothing is normal and like it used to be. And you look at this and it just makes you smile. It makes me
Yeah.
happy.
I love the enthusiasm of the mom. She just
Yeah,
is so
it's
proud
great
of her son.
great photo. And then we ended up with this really beautiful one because we're so lucky to live in beautiful Maine. This was by Sean. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a bit.
I just want to say thanks for the suggestion. I think it was Tom Conroy who said one of the photos would look great as a puzzle. And I don't think I have any of my photographs have ever been made into a puzzle, but now I want to do that. So thanks for that suggestion. I don't think it was my photo you were talking about, but I appreciate it.
I wanted to also remind people that please put your questions in the Q&A. It's at the bottom of your screen, all the way to the right. So you may be used to talking in chat, but it's harder for us to get the questions out of chat. And I'm going to start with, let's see what we have here. Kristen Bates asks, how much editing can you do on your photos after you take them?
Want to take that one, Greg?
Yeah, go ahead. It's all yours, Derek.
Oh, okay. That's a really good question. You're definitely very limited to what you can do ethically with a photograph. However, it is definitely different from, I've worked at a few different photo staffs, and it changes from one staff to the other. Some people are a little bit looser about it. Some people are a little tighter about it. But you definitely don't want to change the image to the point where it isn't truthful anymore, and it isn't representative of what you saw. So you can lighten it a little bit, you can darken it a little bit, but change the color, maybe add a little saturation. That's about all you can do.
Right. I think the general rule of thumb in most of the places where I've worked is most things that we used to do in the darkroom with burning and dodging is acceptable. And in the digital realm for us, the big thing is we can't, and there have been a number of instances of this even at National Geographic, but at Sports Illustrated as well, and even down east, where there were items taken out of the picture. They were cloned out. And that can't happen. That's the line for photojournalism is we cannot add or subtract anything in the photo that wasn't there and that wasn't created by the camera, because that's not truthful. The bottom line for us as photojournalists is we need you to believe that our photos are truthful and they represent the scene accurately. Because if we don't have your faith in that, then we're lost, quite frankly. So that's why we toe that line. There's no tolerating altering photos, and it doesn't get done. In terms of specifics, to give you an example, say we have a photo where our sensor has gotten dirty because we're changing lenses and we have some dust specks on the sensor. We will we'll clone those dust spots out of the photo because they're not inherent to the scene. They didn't exist there. The dirty sensor introduced them. So we're not altering the reality of that photo. We are cleaning an imperfection in the camera that recorded it. So that's one example of like where that line grays a little bit. So I hope that answers the question somewhat.
I have a question that's interesting from someone attending who says, perspective seems very important in many of these images. The rule of thirds does not. Comment? I love it. I mean, we love to break the rules here.
Right,
for one
right.
thing.
So I love this comment because my daughter, who's a senior in high school, is taking a photography class this semester, which I didn't even know about, and I'm thrilled about. And her second assignment, she had to take 10 photos that applied the rule of thirds. And we were talking about this one night as I was looking over some photos on my laptop. And I said, well, let's look over photos that I've taken over the past couple of weeks, and we can just talk about what has rule of thirds and what doesn't. And we cycled through them really quick, and she said, nope, 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 yep, nope, nope, nope. And my lesson to her was, it's important to learn the rules so that you can ignore them later on. And that doesn't explain it well enough, but it's important to know why you would do that, and then just don't get stuck in the rut of doing it all the time. And I'll say for myself, having been photographing for over 25 years, composition is not an analytical process for me. My brain just does it on its own. Like I don't sit there and think about it. It just happens in my head. And I don't know a better way to explain that.
Eric, you have a great sense of composition. Did you learn the rule of thirds? Do you ever think about it?
I didn't learn the rule of thirds. You know, I didn't go to photojournalism school. I went to school for environmental studies, and I took photography courses, but I never was taught the rule of thirds. In fact, I don't think I heard the term until I met Greg. But I have to agree that it's an automatic process for me. It just kind of happens. In fact, it probably happens when I don't have my camera with me and I'm just looking around. I'm probably composing things in my head, to be honest. But it's nothing that you really have to think about, and it kind of just makes sense, I think.
Joe asked, have people been more agreeable to being closer subjects of a photo as the pandemic rolls on? So in other words, I think has it gotten easier for people to agree to photos? And you might want to talk, like Derek, what did you have to do in the beginning when we had to take a picture of somebody like in March or April?
Right. So when at the beginning of the pandemic, there were definitely, most of our photographs were front step photos. We did not feel comfortable going in anyone's house, and people didn't really feel comfortable having us in. So a lot of them were taken right there on their front steps or on their front lawn. And it was challenging because a lot of portraits and a lot of photos started to look alike. So we had to try to figure out what we could do to make them better and make them a little different from each other. So you weren't seeing the same thing every day. And the same kind of challenges happened with photographing people with masks on. It started to get a little repetitive, and it was challenging to get, you know, a good photo that you felt like you hadn't seen before.
Here's a great question. A nice question. Thank you for asking. Are you historians these days or artists? Is there a difference? Well, I hope we're both.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, since I started at the Press Herald, I would have, after my first year here, and people got to recognize my byline, I would go on an assignment and somebody who was familiar with my work would say, oh, you're the artistic one. And I'm like, what do you mean? Oh, you know, you have such a flair for your photos. And I'm like, well, it's not a bad thing. Like a photo can be informative and it can be beautiful. It's not, it doesn't have to be one or the other. It's not binary. And I think, you know, if I have any hallmarks that I would, in my photography, that I would bring up, one is that I don't get hung up on that division between informative and beautiful imagery. I'm just really patient. I will wait a very long time for the right moment. If I don't have to be to the next assignment in 15 minutes.
Do you have a photo that's the one that got away? For example, an amazing scene to capture that for whatever reason, the photo didn't manage to capture.
Derek?
Wow. Well, I got a little hung up on the photo that got away. Just immediately brought me back to a couple of photos that did get away from me for other reasons. But when I first started my career and when I was in New York, I happened to be out feature hunting and I ran into a police chase and they chased a guy into the woods and they held him at gunpoint, or they were pointing their guns, and it was a photo that I know I nailed it. And I was so excited to go back into the office because I was fairly new on the job and show them this photo that I got, and my card corrupted and I lost all the images.
Oh.
And so that's one that got away. But can you repeat that question? Because the last part of it, I need to wrap my head around.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, if I can find it.
Oh,
I think it already,
remember
I
that?
think
Yeah.
she moved it to the answered.
Yeah,
So do you have a photo that's the one that got away, an amazing scene to capture that for whatever reason the photo didn't manage to capture?
Oh, yes. Not one that probably sticks out in my head because there's probably too many. Unfortunately, in this business, as in many, there's a lot of failure along with the success, and it happens quite often, almost every day. You know, there's something that doesn't really work out the way you wanted it to, and then you know might feel a little bit like a failure. It might still work well enough to use, or get printed in the paper, but it's not what you really envisioned or saw.
Right. And I think it's a tough question because as photojournalists who are photographing 5 days a week, I certainly have had assignments where I felt like, oh, I could have photographed that better, or, I was not approaching that correctly. But you put the photos in, and the thing is, tomorrow's another day, and you go right back at it, and you've got another chance to make meaningful photographs. So it's difficult to think about the ones that got away because we're always right back at it the next day. Like, you can't let that image that you didn't get, or if you had a day where you think, oh, I could have done better, well, then you've got tomorrow to do better. And that's, I think, how most of us operate. And I can only think of, my example would be a photo that almost got away that didn't, was back in the days of film. During a snowstorm, I was photographing a man shoveling outside of a church in Saco, and I shot a whole roll of film on it, and I was going through the negatives, and somehow I eked a 37th frame out of that roll of 36 exposures, and the 37th frame was clearly the image, and it got a lot of response. People loved it. And so that was one that should have gotten away that didn't. So I feel like I got lucky.
What are your go-to lenses that you use when you're out on a shoot? Derek, you want to go first?
Yeah, well, my go-to lens is surprisingly enough, it's not everyone's pick or not many people's pick, but it's a 50 millimeter 1.4. It's kind of a mid-range in the expensive category, so it's not the best lens you can get. You can buy a 50 millimeter 1.2, which is a little beefier and a little stops down a little bit more, but it's nice and light, easy to carry. You can put it in your pocket, and that would be my favorite lens. If I had to take one, I'd take that one with me.
Greg?
It's a little bit different for me. I recently, in the past couple of years, I switched over to Sony mirrorless cameras from Canon. I had shot Canon for over 20 years, but a friend of mine lent me one of his, a Sony A9, and I got completely captivated with it. And my Canon gear was quite old, so I needed to be upgrading anyway. So I have completely switched over to Sony. And back when I was Canon, shooting with Canon, I would have two bodies around my neck, and one would have a 70 to 200 2.8, and the other would be a 16 to 35 2.8. And I could cover 75 to 80% of my assignments with those two lenses. And I decided when I switched to Sony's that I've been doing this so long, it was time for me to change mental gears in the lens category. So I've actually switched over. I still have a 70 to 200 2.8, and Derek might back me up here, but I had a conversation with photojournalists recently that you almost can't be a photojournalist and not have a 70 to 200 2.8. It's like one of those critical lenses. But in terms of the lenses that I use more on a daily basis, I would say mine is, it's a Zeiss 25 millimeter f2. I like wide angles because I like being in close, and I don't necessarily shoot portraits with them, but for a lot of things, when a wide angle is used correctly, I feel that it really immerses you in the scene. And that's one of the things I love about photography, is getting to know people and be close with people in scenes and situations. And even if it's protests, being right in the middle of everything is where I want to be. And that's, for me, what a wide angle lens conveys is, when you look at an image shot with a 25 millimeter, I feel like it gives you a very good sense of what it's like to be there. So I use that 25-2 quite frequently.
I think that most photographers who are newspaper photographers and shoot every day carry a variety of lenses with them, and a wide angle, a normal lens, which is like the 50 millimeter, it gives the same view as your eyes give basically, and a telephoto. And just they have to be able to cover everything. This is a great comment and a good question. Please don't take this the wrong way, but I only have a smartphone camera at my disposal. People have said that I have a good eye. Is it possible to take good quality photos with a smartphone camera? And I'm going to take that because yes is my answer. Yes, you can. And one of my favorite pictures that I've ever taken, I took with a $25 plastic camera. And when I was playing around with it. And I think that it's not the camera, it's not the equipment. I mean, all of that is important. Of course, you can't get protest photos at night without real camera equipment. Your phone isn't going to do that. You can't shoot sports without a telephoto lens. There are situations where, you just need professional equipment to get professional results. But in terms of good pictures, yes. Yes, and I love my iPhone camera, and I think you should too. But I don't know if Derek and Greg agree.
I completely agree. Some of my best photos have been taken with my smartphone of my family, and even landscape type stuff I've shot with my phone, and it's amazing. And the best thing about it
It's
I think
it's
it's
always
amazing
on you.
how good they are.
yeah, it's often been said that the best camera you can have is the one that you have on you, and that is where smartphones come into play. You almost always have your phone on you, so when something happens, it's not like, oh, I got to go to the car to get my camera, or oh, I wish I had brought my camera along with me. You have it there. And is the quality is not as good as a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, but the quality is really surprisingly good for a smartphone. And it allows you to capture things because you have it on you. And when you see that moment, you have what you need in your hand already.
Strawberry, how are we doing for time?
We could do one more question if you guys aren't pressed for time.
No, we're fine. This is great.
Hey,
Um,
Michelle, there's a question from Joe Francoeur. And Joe, I apologize if I pronounced your last name wrong. And he asks, have people been more agreeable to being closer subjects of a photo as the pandemic rolls on? Do you think that would be a good one to address?
I thought we did.
Oh, did we address that?
Yes.
Yeah, a little bit. I think we talked about just how we had to, do a lot of front step type photos. But
Oh,
I think
that one came up earlier then. Okay, I might have had my earbud out.
Another thing to note is that to make that easier on the photographers when the pandemic hit, what we usually need to get people's names to identify them if you can see their face in the photograph. And as a staff, we decided that we wouldn't do that so that we would eliminate the need to walk up and talk to someone in close quarters. So that just definitely made it a lot easier for us as photographers to stay safe and,
A related
keep other
question.
people safe.
You take some really wonderful photos of children and large groups of people who can be identified. How do you get permission in group events like protests or photos of minors not with their families?
Well, so the beginning of that answer is that if there is an event happening in a public space, as photojournalists, we are covered by the First Amendment in covering that. We don't have to ask permission to photograph someone who's doing something in a public space. Beyond that, in terms of minors whose parents aren't present, we generally will not even take their photos or make photos of them without the parents knowing. And that's a rule of the Press Herald. It depends on the age. There's a line there for whether we can contact the parents and check in. The other element, particularly with the protests this summer, is there are some people at the protest who would prefer not to be identified, despite the fact that they are participating in a public protest, being surrounded by literally hundreds of smartphones, video recording the event. And I can speak for Derek and I that we both have been approached. Actually, I know that Brianna had been too, by people who said that they would prefer not to be photographed. And I'll let Derek answer for himself, but for the times that it happened to me, if that person wasn't in my photograph, like if they were coming up to me proactively, I would say, okay, well, I'll try not to have you in my photo. But on the flip side of that, if there's some really important moment happening and that person is in the background of the photo, then I can't worry about their identification because they're in a public place. And if what I'm trying to show with the moment is more important, it overrides, because they're in a public place. So in the protests, I tried to honor that wherever I could. And more often than not, I did. I don't know, Derek, do you want to?
I think we've run out of time. And Derek, is there anything you want to say quickly before I close?
Thank you to everyone that joined us. Yeah, this has been fun, and we appreciate all your support. So thanks.
Yeah, and thanks for the comments and thanks for all of your support.
Yeah, and thank you for attending. And I also want to just say that October 14th is our next subscribers only event. It's the rock music scene, and it's with Amsel Conti and Bob Keys. And it's wonderful to talk to you all. And I wish it could be in person and not by Zoom. And thank you. And thank you for subscribing and making our work possible. And good night. And thank you, Greg and Derek.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.